English translation. 243rd contact, Monday 22nd June 1992. 02.46 hours.
Very pleased, my friend, to already see you again.
It is also a pleasure for me, Edward. It was simply my desire to visit you again without any special reason.
That is very pleasing, and I appreciate your visit. However, have you come here just to have some rest and to relax for a short time and to chat with me a bit, or is your need based on a particular reason?
My desire is simply to talk to you a bit.
What kind of discussion are you thinking about?
You may decide that.
Do you have problems, my friend? Your words sound so strange.
The sorrows are of the same kind as you carry.
Aha, I knew it, that there is something weighing upon you, my friend.
I really did not come here for that, because these sorrows cannot be settled by a conversation.
What kind of sorrows are they if the same ones are moving me? I can only imagine that you are worried about our world, because my worries are moving along the same lines. Beginning with the murderous Ramboism in Yugoslavia, over the southern CIS Commonwealth of Independent States, formerly USSR, to the environmental summit in Rio de Janeiro, which I plainly find to be a farce. There are also other sorrows depressing me concerning the world and humanity.
Well, it could not be concealed from you because precisely the events you mentioned make me worried, because they threaten to end in a form which foreshadows very dangerous events of the expectable future. If I start with the environmental summit, as you call it, which took place in Rio de Janeiro, then I would like to say about it that it had not just been a farce, but also an excessively dirty and primitive alibi exercise for the sole purpose of image and prestige and hypocrisies. The third world countries call for accountability and help from the Nordic and Western industrialized countries, and blame them for their own environmental destruction. Likewise, the industrialized countries push the blame onto the third world countries. Thereby, the industrialized countries promise hypocritically that they will use financial resources to help the third world countries to promote environmental and development policies for the protection of the earth and its entire life, as well as for the development of the less well-off countries. On the one hand, this is about the easing of the bad conscience of the industrialized countries, and on the other hand, about nothing but the fostering of image and prestige. The so-called Agenda 21 is virtually meaningless and futile, as are the signatures provided for it. The fact that President Bush was stubbornly refusing to co-sign bears witness to the American morality and unscrupulousness towards every life. Also towards the fauna life, because the Americans, like many others, act equally feloniously and thus criminally regarding the Convention for the Protection of Species. Translators comment, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. To be fair, it must be said that only a few of the signatories showed an attitude for not only promoting the image and prestige. However, the most serious problem of the destruction of the planet Earth and all its life was not included in the so-called Earth Summit of Rio de Janeiro, which was to be the starting point for a global environmental policy to save the planet and the life through special environmental protection measures. This greatest problem, and the truthfully most important, very first, and irrefutably deadliest point of the destruction of the planet Earth, and of all life existent thereon, as well as of the atmosphere, is namely the vast overpopulation from which all evils and all misery and crimes on the earth arise. In Rio, however, it was not mentioned with a single word that the overpopulation is to blame for all the misery and all crimes and all the destruction of the earth, and that this overpopulation must be mitigated and decimated by drastic measures through a rigorous worldwide birth stop. Well, It could not be concealed from you because precisely the events you mentioned make me worried, because they threaten to end in a form which foreshadows very dangerous events of the expectable future. Crimes, diseases, destruction, and also all the wars to the extent that these have occurred since the Middle Ages are solely and exclusively to be attributed to the overpopulation. All these evils can never be remedied by any hypocritical measures, as they are devised by the human beings of the earth and have been raised in Rio de Janeiro. The entirety of evils can only be remedied, as we have already often explained, namely, only through a rigorous birth stop, which is controlled by the authorities and their order and protection bodies, to preserve the earthly life and the planet from further destruction. There is no other form to save earthly life and the planet from further destruction. For this reason, I must also ask you to once again make my explanations in this respect accessible to earthly governments and other responsible persons.
I can do this in the manner of compiling a new actual name of publication, which we then send again to the governments, etc. The only question is whether that is useful. When I think of my 1975 initiative, when I warned about the danger of CFCs in your name, I feel sick, because following thousands of letters to the governments, other responsible ones, and to the universities in the whole world, I had not received a single response.
This is known to me, but we must continue to try it. There must also be some further clarifications regarding the civil war machinations in South Africa, the CIS countries, and the former Yugoslavia. Mikhail Gorbachev fought for the Soviet Union to be preserved as an entity, which had nothing to do with the fact that communism could not have been abolished because of this, which was also in Gorbachev's far-flung plans, of which he was just not yet fully aware. By preserving the Soviet Union according to Gorbachev's plan, the whole order in all the countries of Russia would have been preserved by that very Soviet bloc of states, so that the bloody and murderous riots could never have taken place, the way they have already been shattering the CIS for some time. However, to blame for the fact that Mikhail Gorbachev could not realize his plan and that civil war actions and mass killings of human beings in the CIS could occur, was the power-hungry Boris Yeltsin, who catapulted Gorbachev out of his office and thereby triggered the catastrophe that today prevails in the states of at least the southern and southeastern territory of the former Soviet Union. But those who wage war and revolution over there are no better than the power-hungry Yeltsin, and therefore no better than the belligerents and revolutionists in the former Yugoslavia. All of them are only wannabe Rambos and merciless, ruthless, brutal, and dehumanized murderers who are out for the one and only reason of satisfying their lust for murder and blood-waging wars and revolutions. This proves to be well-founded by the fact that these gangs of murderers are not only killing armed persons, but mainly human beings, men, women, and children of the uninvolved population. And the undoubted blame for the fact that these monstrous atrocities can happen at all has to be taken by those countries around the world who would have the power to prevent this in the same or similar form as it did happen in the Gulf War. However, in the former Yugoslavia and in the countries of the Russian Association, as well as in South Africa, etc., oil opportunities and the danger from atomic bombs are not a factor. That is why there is no interference. However, the United Nations organization also bears the blame for this, as it is first and foremost their duty to take decisive steps to stop the madness. Such measures, however, cannot consist of measures of economic sanctions in the way the UN and the individual countries pursue them. Also, it is not enough to station troops in countries in crisis, the way the UN pursues it, which sends their military forces only as observers and peace doves to the trouble spots. Expecting to achieve real peace and to then even likewise preserve it is illusory and proves that the leaders of the UN have no ability whatsoever to understand the facts for ending wars and revolutions, and for creating real peace.
You are talking about the fact that solely combative forces would have to be deployed, according to the principle of Enoch, who created the troops fighting for peace and, in that manner, actual order. In your opinion, the UN would thus be responsible for providing the necessary troops fighting for peace, which would then be deployed everywhere in the trouble spots where necessary. These troops fighting for peace would be equipped with the latest technological armaments, and would, through appropriate military operations, suppress the uprisings, revolutions, and wars, in order to then, afterwards, also be concerned with maintaining the calm and the peace. These troops fighting for peace would, in a further form, also be a world police, which would fight mercilessly against the organized crime, and would nip this in the bud as well. Criminal organizations would have no chances whatsoever anymore, the same as dictators and other power-hungry killers or population groups of the same type.
That is the meaning of my words. Only through the establishment and operation of such troops fighting for peace can order and peace be created and maintained, as well as the organized criminality be eradicated. Empty words and senseless actions are in no wise useful, and efforts for peace only by means of economic sanctions and the provision of blue helmet troops, which cannot bring peace through logical gavolt, are absolutely illusory, as I had already emphasized.
May your word reach the ear of the responsible persons.
Peace and order cannot be created without a fight, which is why it is incomprehensible that human beings could even think and act as stupidly and naively at the time of creating the UN as a combat-free, peace-endeavoring organization. However, not only the founders were stupid and naive, but also the ones who have been responsible to this day, for it was never realized that pigeons can never fight an eagle. The same problem has to be pointed out in other peace organizations, which, owing to their policy of burying one's head in the sand, can never achieve real and lasting successes. This also applies to the Greenpeace movement, which has completely lost sight of its original and once admirable goals. This organization acts falsely today as well, because after initially having had praiseworthy aims and means of acting, it has now become a criminal association, which by means of illegal activities wants nothing but getting itself talked about. Today, the organization is that of a malicious and willful chaos, whose members also behave as anarchists and perform downright terror. That is why Greenpeace must already be called a terrorist organization which, for the purpose of its own financial preservation, conducts spectacular terroristic chaotic actions.
Unfortunately, you are right, I know. In the meantime, however, many human beings who walk through the world with eyes and senses open have also noticed this. Unfortunately, there are still very many supporters of this chaotic society, which support it financially and keep it alive. The organization would have to be flatly forbidden today, to make way for a new organization with desirable goals, which deals with real environmental protection and the like.
That is also the opinion of mine and all of us. The Greenpeace organization is already, for a long time, no longer active in a protecting way, but has become self-destructing, chaotic, and hostile to the environment, and even endangers human lives in many cases, even the ones belonging to its own organization. The organization and its members are only anxious to carry out spectacular actions and to organize terror and chaos in order to get into the headlines of the media, hoping to thereby find followers and donors.
Unfortunately, this is also the case in similar forms with other organizations, with purely political or religious ones too. However, let us get off from this, because I would like to ask you something. Our writings are usually supposed to be distributed in the German language across the world. Is it then really feasible that human beings around the world will learn German to read the writings?
All those who are honestly interested in the truth will also learn the German language. Thus, this language can find a world-encompassing importance and replace the so-called current world languages fully and more expressively.
That would be really great, because then the human beings on our Earth would have a language with which practically everything capturable linguistically can be expressed. Unfortunately, this is not possible with all other earthly languages. Let me, however, again speak of something of which we had just recently spoken, namely of refugee affairs. I think, if I am to make your present-day words accessible to the responsible persons of the earth, it would be an advantage if you would again say something about these matters.
I will gladly do that, also because one cannot raise these things often enough. We recently talked about the fact that, on the one hand, because of the threat of climate change, and, on the other, due to many political warfaring turmoil and machinations, more and more human beings would flee from their ancestral home countries and seek refuge in other countries, which would result in entire emigrations of nations. Such events have already begun a long time ago, as a result of which millions of people are already fleeing. Take, for example, the flight of the Kurds, then of the Albanians, and all those from Sri Lanka, South Africa, and other African states, as well as from the former Yugoslavia and the former Soviet states. The refugees are so many that they flood the states that help them and bring immense problems. Thus, in the coming period, entire regions will simply be emptied of human beings as they flee, while the countries to which the refugees flee will slowly overflow with humans and fall into economic hardship. This will still be getting much worse in a more distant future time, especially then, when the severe expectable climatic catastrophes in the southern and northern hemispheres appear. This flight of human beings from their homelands to the economically and politically better placed states entails major dangers and leads further to a worldwide catastrophe. In order to counter this catastrophe and the looming dangers, there is only one possibility. However, it is precisely this one which is so fiercely combated by those who are softened and incapable of life and false humanists. Namely, that the countries are sealing their borders for refugees of all kinds and are rigorously taking action to stop the waves of refugees. Only persons whose lives are directly threatened by religious or political machinations in their homeland, meaning direct targeting of the refugee person, that is to say, personal, may be regarded as refugees. But whoever calls for and promotes something else based on false humanist justifications endangers the continuance of his or her own folk and the economy and security of his or her own country. If refugees of all kinds, and in huge numbers, can continue to escape into economically and politically better off countries, without their actual personal life being threatened, this leads to an intermixing of folks to an endless extent, with the tragic consequences that the already worldwide occurring softening and false humanization of the human beings becomes rampant to such a degree that the majority of humankind will soon become incapable of life. Life-incapable life forms, however, will inevitably, within a short time, be dominated by terrorism and dictatorship. A fact which has already begun to take shape for years, particularly in the so-called civilized countries, and which already brings evil fruits. For that one may only see the corporate crime, as well as terroristic and anarchistic machinations of various groups and organizations, which are increasingly getting out of hand and are slipping away from the control of the governments, the military, and the security organs. The false humanists, however, and the other softened and ones who are incapable of life, are even promoting all of this and speak of brutality and inhumanity when rigorous measures are taken against these grievances. Unconscionable elements hide refugees due for deportation and are thereby fostering the catastrophe which is already noticeable on the horizon, but which is not recognized by the incapable of life false humanists, because their rationality and their intellect are insufficient for recognizing the truth. They are usually hiding their unintellect and their irrationality behind stupid excuses such as love for the next one, peace, humanity, and faith. It is precisely these talks, however, which prove that they do not possess the glimmer of an idea of love for the next one, peace, and humanity, and therefore understand nothing of it. We, too, once had to fight the same problems that we could only control by precisely these facts as I have named them. With that, I am also referring to the peacekeeping troops according to Enoch's system, which also embodied a form of world police, by which the entire organized criminality, both in its small and large form, got destroyed. On the earth, however, the evil of the overpopulation comes on top of everything, which must also be nipped in the bud, which can only be achieved by a rigorous birth stop of a worldwide nature, according to the system known to you.
Once more there is nothing left to say by me, but may your word reach the ear of the responsible ones, who alone have the power to carry out the necessary, even if it might only be possible with logical Gewalt, beyond all might and violence, with all available forceful means, physical, psychical, mental, and to use consciousness-based powers, abilities, and skills in order to carry out and practice tremendous deeds and actions.
We will see what outcomes the initiative will bring.
I would like to be surprised, if it should be useful. May I, however, ask some questions again?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. The volcano Pinatubo, of which you said that it will remain active. Can we expect it to become dangerous again?
Already, in the next weeks, it is again going to be somewhat more active, but there will be no danger of destruction for the time being. Only much later it will become dangerous again. To rest, however, it will no longer come in the following time. Other volcanoes around the world will also become more prominent in the future, including those that have not been active for decades or for centuries. There will thus be an increased volcanism all around the Earth, whereby also increased earthquakes all over the Earth's globe will go with it. The earthquakes will also increase in California and along the entire length of the San Andreas Fault, which will already become apparent in the next coming weeks. But I already explained to you in this regard that the tremendous tremors of the explosions which had taken place in Mexico are a determining cause for this, which may also lead to a much earlier occurrence of the great quake to be expected in California and along the San Andreas Fault than would have been the case under natural circumstances. The coming volcanic activities and earthquakes are often the direct or indirect consequence of human, criminal, and destructive machinations with the Earth. In that regard, not only atomic bomb tests and commercial use of atomic bombs are to be blamed, but also weight changes and atmospheric changes, as well as climate changes, caused by the human beings of the Earth. However, the Earth is not just now rebelling against this, for it has already been doing so for many years. Also, the damage to the various outer layers of Earth, such as, for example, the ozone layer, affects the correct and natural functioning of the entire Earth. The damage to the Earth's layers bring about evil phenomena of the destruction of the equilibrium of the Earth and its internal structures. Even if this appears till now as absurd to the earthly scientists and the responsible ones on the Earth. But they will have to be proven wrong. Even those quantities of ozone, which are located above the Earth's surface, and are irresponsibly generated by the human beings in horrendous quantities, represent a very great danger for the Earth and its existence. Not only are these ozone deposits also dangerously damaging the internal and external structures of the Earth itself, but also the microorganisms in fresh water and in salt water are damaged and destroyed. The so-called phytoplankton alone is already a very great necessity for earthly life, but this is damaged by the ozone deposits in such a manner that its natural function slowly fails. Phytoplankton, in fact, filters huge amounts of the daily produced carbon dioxide, about 20,000 million tons per year. If the phytoplankton is destroyed more and more, however, the carbon dioxide is getting so much out of hand that in a short time the greenhouse effect on the Earth doubles and triples. While a great amount of the accumulating carbon dioxide is sinking into the soil, sinking into the subsoil of water bodies and gets ingested by life forms, this does, however, not mean that it gets absorbed. When the time comes, it gets free again and causes inconceivable destruction on the planet and all life. The carbon dioxide depositing itself in the soil creates chemical processes in the Earth's interior, which in turn lead to structural damage to the planet, as well as to atmospheric damage and to impairments of the entire organic life.
Still another question? You recently talked about the fact that you know of more AIDS viruses than do earthly scientists. In my opinion, this may mean that thus also until now still unknown AIDS forms might appear, right?
That is in accordance with the correctness. It is already the case that the disease is spreading in a new form, in such a manner that it can no longer be detected by an HIV test. The new type of AIDS disease is a mutation of the original disease, which can no longer be noticed by the test examinations known to date, so new ways must be found for it.
Very unpleasant, but something of this kind had to be reckoned with, in the same manner one has to reckon with negative developments in other respects. I am especially thinking about Saddam Hussein and the former Yugoslavia. In reference to Hussein, I think that he does not yet think in one bit of considering his so-called battle of all battles, or well, the mother of all battles, as finished. In my opinion, it will not be very long before he will make himself again talked about regarding this matter. He is still unrestrainedly striving for unlimited power, which he would like to extend to the entirety of Eastern Arabia.
Your guess corresponds to the reality. Saddam Hussein is very insidious and immensely power-hungry, devious, false, and sneaky. He also deceives the UN observers and the UN envoys, tasked with searching for weapons of mass destruction and for such plans. Basically, he is fooling the whole world and laughs at the childish stupidity of all those who have the security of the world put in their hands. We are here mainly talking about the UN organization and all the states which are members of it, which are for the matters of Saddam Hussein and in regard of the stupid and ineffective sanctions increasingly making themselves laughable and unfeasible, in the same manner as in the case of the former Yugoslavia, where, by means of stupid economic sanctions, peace is sought to be brought about. A stupid and childish proceeding of those responsible, who are in no wise capable of mastering such situations, but nevertheless still occupy positions of responsibility in which the existence or non-existence of the earth and humankind is decided. Those in responsibility are, in truth, themselves not yet matured so much in and through life itself to such an extent that they would have obtained the necessary cognition for the leading of the terrestrial states and generally all the states of the earth, let alone that they could have created the necessary experience for themselves to really and truthfully initiate peace on the earth and bring about peace. Nor have they advanced in any form so far in their evolution and the necessary experience and cognition in order to realize that only peacekeeping troops, according to Enoch's system, are capable of truly creating peace and also preserving it. The actions of those responsible are insufficient and improper, inadequate, meaningless, incomplete and deficient, illogical, and extremely disadvantageous for calm and peace. The inadequate, frail, and wholly false and improper action of those responsible already borders on criminal machinations, which causes damage that can never be made good again and can never be justified. Particularly with regard to Saddam Hussein, who would require a stop put to his game, once and for all, as well as in the case of the former Yugoslavia, where there is murder going on for sheer lust of killing and bloodlust. All those responsible of the earth commit tremendous crimes because they are not interfering in the form of peacekeeping troops and are thus not putting a rapid and final end to all gruesome murdering, torturing, and threatening. The UN organization, which is mainly responsible for such matters, with all its member countries, bears the greatest guilt for all the crimes of all kinds that are taking place around the world. In that regard, I am talking not only of all the political crimes in the form of wars, etc., but also of organized crime, such as, for example, of the Mafia, which would also have to be destroyed by UN forces if this organization, the very same UN, would at last reach a healthy framework of rationality and set up the necessary peacekeeping troops, through which alone real peace can be fought for and maintained. Likewise, criminality at an individual as well as organizational level can only be fought and eliminated by the necessary peacekeeping troops. The responsible ones of the earth are, however, unfortunately still too immature to have gained the necessary cognitions and acquired the relevant experiences for this. They may have grown in physical size and reached a certain age, but there is not exactly much to recognize of reason and intellect and wisdom in them. They are no more and no less than children who have grown in body height, without cognitions and without experience. That is the truth. And precisely by this, the UN organization and all its member states call themselves into question, which means that their existence is unjustified and is merely window dressing and greed for profit, but does not represent what it should be, namely a worldwide organization of rationality, of intellect, of recognition of truth, and of experience, which in fact and in truth creates peace and calm in every economic and political form, as well as regarding the organized and also the unorganized crime and any criminality of any form. Should the UN organization and all its member states not soon realize this, then this organization would have no rights whatsoever to a further existence, so that a different and truly intentional international organization should be founded and brought into being, which then completely fulfills its duties.
These heads would rather argue day and night for defending irrational opinions and following some stupid ideologies and false hopes, than to come to reason and to act. Their arguing is generally based on untruth and on the non-understanding of all things. How did Enoch once put it? Nobody has to argue. If he or she knows the truth, is rationality-bearing, and speaks the truth. But whoever has to argue neither knows the truth, nor do they express it, and therefore their rationality is also not formed. But since these responsible heads lack the rationality and the intellect, they are also not capable to recognize and to comprehend the truth, which is why they also cannot make a right decision. But if a decision is made by them, then it is not by means of rationality and intellect, but solely by a majority of votes. A fact that Enoch already recognized millions of years ago, and therefore emphasized reason and understanding, and only decisions in this regard, with all those responsible in the worlds of that time. Those days he also coined the words, "Whoever wants to make the right decision in truth must do so on the basis of rationality and intellect and on the basis of expertise and truth." Consequently, decisions can never be taken by a majority of votes.
That corresponds to the given facts. Enoch's respective wisdom has also been preserved to the present day with the human beings of the earth, except that it has been altered by earthly philosophers who are still familiar with Enoch's words of wisdom through tradition. But this is generally common on the earth, for very many are always resting on the laurels of others, which is particularly true of many so-called philosophers, who usually built or are building up their ideologies based on earlier ideologies of others, and always produce but little cognitions of the truth of their own. From time immemorial, there have been very few really good and really truth-finding philosophers on the earth who discovered and created their own truthly cognitions, experiences, and essences of wisdom.
I know, and the newer so-called philosophers, in any case, do not belong to them. It is precisely these things that are currently the subject of the spiritual teaching which I am writing. Because these things are also matters which must be covered in a spiritual teaching-based manner. Only one thing is a bit of a headache for me. In the spiritual teaching, there are many things that must very well be paid attention to as spiritual science, which, however, do not represent actual parts of the teaching from a spiritual teaching-based perspective. The real spiritual teaching-based perspective is, indeed, the spiritual teaching, that is to say, the teaching of the Spirit itself, which should rather be called the philosophy of creation. The pure philosophy of creation, however, contains only creational theorems and aphorisms. That is, the entire teaching of the laws of the creation, the recommendations of the creation, and the rules of the creation by which all things of all occurrences and spheres, of life and of being as well as of the creation itself, are equally, doubtlessly, and all-timely correctly explained and set forth, as also all things and concerns of the spirit and the material manifestations. But in order to be able to make these things truly intelligible to the human being of the earth, there is only the option of mixing them with earthly happenings, comparisons, events, phenomena, and manifestations, as well as many other earthly and material facts, in order to make them comprehensible for the human being of the earth in that manner, so that he or she can also understand and evaluate them with his or her ratio. This procedure and this mode of presentation of the truthly knowledge is then called spiritual teaching. The philosophy of the creation, however, is due to the necessary procedure only in parts included in it, and is also spread further across all other writings, as well as across the age of Aquarius, name of Figu publication Stimme der Wassermannszeit, which has articles that contain teaching parts on the philosophy of the creation. This form of presenting the teaching is probably the only feasible one. That is why it had been used since time immemorial.
This is true, and we are also not aware of any other form of presentation for the teaching of the truth, and thus of the teaching of the Spirit, which must actually be called the philosophy of the creation in its entirety.
It can indeed not be otherwise. But now once more a question about the overpopulation. Do you not think that it might be necessary to have us increasingly make public that all the evils that spread on the earth can practically solely be traced back to the overpopulation?
I would have talked about that in the next few minutes. Yes, such an approach has become an urgent necessity. Regarding this, you will in the near future also receive an article suitable for this purpose from a passive member from Germany, which you should use for such initiatives.
Do you mean that from now on we should start more initiatives or otherwise take steps to proclaim against the overpopulation and for a worldwide regulation of births in the form of a birth stop?
Yes, that is the meaning of my words. Such an initiative against the overpopulation and for a worldwide birth stop has become urgently required and should in the future be a permanent object of your interests and efforts.
That requires a tremendous amount of money, which we, however, do not have because such initiatives consume immense sums. Would it not therefore be possible that we at least, or as a minimum, Take copies of the current contact report, in which we also print the article of the passive member you mentioned, which are then allowed to be copied by all readers and other interested and responsible persons, whereupon these are able to send the copies to all governments, newspapers and magazines, radio stations and TV stations, as well as to doctors, all kinds of organizations, associations, churches and acquaintances, relatives, friends and private persons of all kinds. I think that this would be the most effective and far-reaching method.
You certainly hit the truth with that. Yes, act accordingly, as you have just said. Such an approach will be the most effective. However, this initiative should be pursued uninterruptedly for the time ahead, so that all of the human beings of the earth can be included and repeatedly confronted with it. This is the same as with a teaching. Only through the constant repetition of a thing or a knowledge, etc., is the human being able to comprehend and retain in his or her memory what is to be learned, whereby they then begins to act according to it.
That is right, but especially regarding the birth stop. What matters is that every single human being is anxious to act on his or her own initiative in accordance with the birth stop, without it only being feasible to carry it out by reverting to the power of the state. I mean that every human being should and must, also without a state regulation, be concerned about not procreating any offspring, as long as it does not occur within the framework of the order which contributes to the reduction of the overpopulation, or is just based on its framework.
On that I can only agree with you. Now, however, my friend, I must speak about something else. That is, of something being the second reason for me having come here. It is about note, solely private affairs of a core group member.
Those are words that had already been spoken in the past.
It is your decision, but I would like to say that this time it is really no trivial matter.
I will wait anyways.
I told you that you must know yourself what is right. But now, my friend, my time is over. Goodbye. This time it will take a bit longer until I will return. However, please forward my dearest greetings to all. It is very unpleasant to me that, despite our words of not interfering again in matters of group members, I had to do this anyway, but it seemed to me to be very necessary. Goodbye.
Take care, Salome.